The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 is meant to not only constrain the central planners but protect us from them. Some say that the Fed has been operating outside its legal authority. Finishing what Ron Paul started, Judge Gammon and Robert Barnes are planning to audit the Fed under the Freedom of Information Act. In a recent interview with Robert Kiyosaki and Kim Kiyosaki, Robert Barnes discussed how free speech and free thought are in danger and what resources are available to you to fight back. Talking about freedom of speech, Robert Barnes said that it is really a defining time since maybe the 17th century, 18th century prior to the establishment of the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, and America became sort of the guardian and the light bearer for freedom of speech and freedom of thought around the world, that it would be protected from the state. And it is now at greater risk, in part because they are delegating it to private entities to control and censor and suppress speech. And we saw over the last year what the consequences of that are. Not only in terms of impacting elections and whatever people think about that, but beyond that, they censored critical stories about the whether pandemic was man-made or natural-made, impact issues related to the lockdowns, whether the interventions were gonna be publicly beneficial or detrimental. We have seen that. We are seeing it right now in the cure context, where the CDC and the World Health Organization are now acknowledging there may be unique health risks for certain groups of people, particularly in this case young boys, in response to the cure. It's a greater risk than pandemic presents to them, even by their analysis. But again, these are discussions and conversations that could have and should have happened. Debates and dialogues that should have occurred. But for the censorship and the suppression taking place by big tech, we are increasingly finding that it's being done at the behest and the behalf of governmental entities. So we face an unprecedented, unparalleled change in the modern age to the ability to have free speech, free thought and free debate in the world. He also weighed on his views about the antidote of the pandemic. He said that it was to make life so miserable by using public health interventions that we have never used in the history of the world. We have never employed the lockdowns as a method of dealing with an airborne virus. We have never told people to stay indoors as a response to an airborne virus that mostly dies in the sunshine and outdoors. There's a bunch of things we have never done before, and the goal was not to stop the virus. The goal was to condition people to be ready to say, please, please, government, give me antidote. Give me some experimental drug that has not even met regular FDA vax testing, which usually takes several years. Even for a virus that have never had a successful antidote over time in its history, for a virus that's not even that lethal to most populations. So that where the unknown risk of the antidote, the long tail risks are gonna be are the ones are really dangerous compared to the short term risk of the disease. So it was no question this was the protocol. Procedure was to condition people. It was a real live milligram experiment and we just went through it. None of it is legal under the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which almost all Western and all countries around the world adopted. Because we went through this before, where we trusted a bunch of white lab coats to run the world, and it led to the Connie Buck decision. One of the worst decisions ever that said forced sterilizations was okay. It was relied on a prior decision called Jacobson, which said forced cure could, under certain circumstances, be okay, and then that ultimately led to Korematsu. You can call it the trilogy of infamy, the Jacobson, the Buck, and the Korematsu decisions, where the government said we can do whatever we want, to whoever we want, whenever we want, under some fair pretext. We have since said those decisions were horrendous, particularly the later two. So given that in the Nuremberg Code of 1947, and those three decisions predated that, was supposed to stop all of that, because it said no more experimentation on human beings in the name of medicine or the name of science. States have no right to do so, and what states have to get is informed consent. And what that means is you have to be informed, and consent means it cannot be mandatory. Our emergency use authorization, statute under federal law, incorporates the Nuremberg Code explicitly and expressly, and says you cannot mandate this antidote, which it is simply an emergency use authorized cure. This was decided in the Doe v. Rumsfeld case. when they tried to force it on a different experimental antidote on soldiers back in 2001 and 2002. Then they were trying to do an anthrax experimental antidote for people going into the Iraqi war theater. By the way, that backfired those who did take it. What's amazing is the Fed has sort of dodged this for forever under this sort of fake. Some days they are public, some days they are private, depends on who they are talking about and who is asking questions, whether they are a government entity or not, whether they are obligated by transparency or not. When they want the power, they claim they are a governmental agency. When they don't want people asking questions, they claim they are a private entity. In order to audit the Fed, we gotta FOIA the Fed, and then ultimately we are probably gonna have to sue the Fed, says Robert. So guys, tell me your views about this video in the comment section below. Also don't forget to like this video, share it into your financial community, and do consider subscribing to this channel if you want more such interesting videos on the financial circumstances happening in the market. Thank you and have a nice day.